So a lot of what the first two speakers have said, I am going to echo. And while I didn't say, or wasn't thinking about we should use a life course approach in understanding these problems, of course we should, because you can see how they get cumulative and accumulate throughout the life course and end up with the situation we have with many seniors in Canada today. But we had three questions that framed this particular study, which the others have mentioned, but I'll just briefly review. The first was, what are the settlement experiences and challenges facing recent senior immigrants? And what is the impact of settlement services on these experiences? And then thirdly, what gaps and policy recommendations can we make? So we thought this was pretty straightforward when we began, and we soon got into the literature and saw there were all sorts of definitional issues that we hadn't thought about when we were kind of choosing what literature to look at. So first of all, you know, there's no consistent definition of a senior. I mean, there are many studies who say you're a senior at 55, right? Others say you're not a senior until 65. So all of a sudden you broadened the amount. You know, the life course is lengthened, we broaden our age categories. We have no consistent definition of who a newcomer is. How recent is recent? Are you recent if you've come the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? There's no consistent definition about immigrant status upon arrival in terms of considering recent seniors. Are we only talking about permanent residents? Are we talking about super visas? Are we talking about refugees, temporary workers? I could go on and on, undocumented. So that is a big gray area, and there's definitely no consistent definition of settlement. Is it an outcome or is it a process? Is it both? What is settlement? And then further compounding this is that we don't know what the definition of integration is. What are the benchmarks for an integrated senior? So we weren't sure what that even means, and we're hoping some of our discussants will be able to talk a little bit about that. So within this, you know, kind of messy landscape, we tried to look at senior settlement in four broad areas: economic, social, political, and ideational. We looked at 226 articles in the academic and gray literature, which sounds like a lot, and it was, but the problem was we were searching and not finding anything, which got quite frustrating, but we ended up coming to the realization there are very few academic articles that discuss experiences, challenges, and barriers encountered by recent immigrant seniors. There are even fewer articles that talk about the impact of available settlement services on immigrant seniors, and still even fewer on the effectiveness of these services in mitigating whatever difficulties they face. So what were we to do? If we look at the chart, we can see that only a very small percentage of recent immigrants are seniors, at 4.6%. And the majority, 86%, arrive in the family class category, and most of these, the majority of those, are female. 8% arrive as refugees, and about 3% arrive in the economic class. So this very much shapes what we're going to find in the literature. Majority of the newcomers over age 65 are from the source countries of Asia and Pacific, primarily China, India, the Philippines. So what does this mean? If it's a very small percent of all senior immigrants are recent, it means the majority of senior immigrants in Canada are established, right? Have been here for a long period of time. And so that also shaped what we found in the literature. So what what are some of the challenges that the literature covers? The first is economic security, or what I should call economic insecurity. We find chronic, racialized, geographically concentrated, increasingly suburbanized, low income, which is lasting longer and longer, and increasingly becoming intergenerational. It is, of course, most severe among recent immigrants. Education and language training, lack of fluency in either English or French upon arrival, and lack of fluency in either English and French 5 years later, right? A recent report in BC said 50% of recent senior immigrants knew neither English nor French upon arrival. So there are language programs, but the programs are seen as culturally and geographically inaccessible and ill-suited to their needs, their daily needs. And they're intimidating. And often because of the senior and child care that recent seniors do, you know, they're not paid for, so that becomes difficult for them to get to language. Health and well-being, another very major challenge, which the other two have talked about. Social isolation is actually enormous, and I'm sure that you all know this. There's unaffordable and inaccessible transportation. I work at York, which is in York Region, and we know that's the fastest growing area in the country. The transportation can't keep up with the housing development in that area. So they put in new transportation. You can drive in areas and streets and areas have completely changed within a year. So transportation is lagging behind the movement of immigrants into the suburbs, right? And the effect of that is that if you can't speak the language and you're intimidated by the country in the first place, and then it's difficult to find it and get on it, you're probably less likely to go to a social program. They have exhausting levels of senior and child care, which I'll talk about a bit later. They have low levels of social support, so that their health status, as the others have said, seems to deteriorate over time, which really suggests that migration, you know, is detrimental to senior health. The other challenges that were highlighted in the literature we looked at are identity and belonging. For the most part, about 41% of recent senior women live in extended households. So while they have very strong attachments to family and to their transnational families, they're also more dependent, right? And they're therefore more vulnerable to abuse. So it works both ways. The family provides a lot of support, but it also makes them more vulnerable. And they report, there's not a lot of literature on this, but what there is reports that they're less likely to feel Canadian, whatever that is, you know, in quotes, less likely to feel that they belong to the larger society. They really miss their friends, their families, and their communities, where, you know, their sense of security. So transnational migration among older people was never part of their game plan, right? So we now have mobile aging migrants, and it's a global phenomena, and they don't have a life script for this. Transportation and outdoor spaces, we've mentioned, and I think I skipped over, no, okay. Well, accessing information and support. There seems to be a lack of knowledge of available services, and this is something community people can tell us much better. There seems to be a low use of settlement information. We know that they're less likely to go online to receive this information, although that is, of course, where, you know, that is a major delivery way of function. And if you don't speak English or French, you're not able to understand a lot of the information unless it's in your first language, right? So where do you get information? If you're not going to a place and you're finding it difficult to get to a settlement service, you're relying on friends and family and community for the information that you do receive. So what are some of the gaps and recommendations? Well, improve income security and remove the OAS restrictions, right? And enable recent seniors access to government programs. About 50% of seniors in Canada, that's all seniors, rely on government transfer programs to lift them to slightly above the poverty line, which that means that's huge, right? That's a huge percentage. That means that there are a large number of seniors who live in what we would call invisible poverty. They're $1 or $10 above the poverty line. So that, of course, is compounded for recent seniors who have no access to any government income programs at all. Surprisingly, one of the most interesting rising trends is the number of seniors who want jobs. And recent seniors, when they're interviewed, say, I can't get a job. I don't know how to get a job. I don't know where to get a job. There are no training programs for jobs. And yet, this has become a growing trend. We know that many, Canadians who've been in the labor force their whole lives are remaining there for longer. Recent seniors are assumed to be unproductive and therefore not looking for a job. And I think that's something we need to rethink. Core housing subsidies ought to be made available for those who wish to live independently. Language classes, we need to tailor these to seniors' needs. Provide linguistic mentors in the communities. Provide the child or senior care and make the programs more practical. Another recommendation has to do with health and social services. So recent seniors, it appears, would appreciate more linguistically and culturally appropriate programs that are adequately staffed with flexible programming. They'd like something to offset the high cost of drugs and any healthcare supports that they need. Those are things that are not available to them. Funding for community agencies. This is actually not something we read in the literature, but it was a conclusion we came to, that with this group of recent seniors, we have seniors, community programs, and the larger society. And these community agencies are literally the only thing linking seniors to the larger social structure. And they are performing a vital integrative function, and they need to be better funded than they are. They facilitate immigrant sense of belonging and integration, more so than almost any other unit. Transportation, of course, is something we all bemoan in Toronto. But there are senior fares, but they're saying even with the senior fares, it's too expensive. Develop a network of volunteer drivers. This has been done in some provinces quite successfully. Age-friendly communities, it's a mantra we've taken up, but what specifically does it mean to them? Means improving accessibility of public space. Have more benches, widen the sidewalks. Don't narrow them, widen them. Put in signage that people can read. And finally, we think a national information sharing. There is a large range of formal, informal, formal, direct, indirect services that are being provided by a whole range of institutions, government units, agencies, etc., but they don't necessarily share information with each other. So there may be overlap. This is something you could speak to far better than we can, and perhaps it's too costly to continue this way. So I've talked about the challenges, but there are many contributions Canadian immigrant seniors provide, and we need to talk about these. And they include cultural transmission, their economic contributions, their care and support in these multi-generational living arrangements, their social and civic participation through agencies, and the way they promote integration of other seniors through their involvement. So what are we going to do in the next steps? We need to redefine settlement. We need to extend the definition of settlement, newcomer settlement, probably to 15 years, but I'd be really interested to hear your response on that. We need to distinguish among young, middle, and frail seniors, and we need to take account of their migration status as seniors when they arrived. And then we need more information on benchmarking outcomes, the economic, cultural, and social factors. So next steps. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.